we're here to talk about the growth of wealth management in ASEAN. Now, clearly, the growth of wealth management in ASEAN stems from the fact that there is an unprecedented growth of wealth in Asia and ASEAN as a subset. Now, clearly, this growth is historical. Nowhere else on earth in history have you seen such growth in wealth in such a concentrated area of the world. And so there are challenges. We're looking at ASEAN. So this panel, the idea of this panel is to sit down and trash out maybe the future of wealth management in ASEAN, in Asia, the challenges, which I've been told in Mandarin reads opportunity in wealth management in ASEAN. And I'd like to kickstart the discussion maybe today with a question for Patrick, because we started with Patrick. And we all had coffee thanks to Patrick today. Okay, so Patrick, in your mind, there's growth of wealth in ASEAN, in Asia, there's growth of wealth management solutions, theoretically, that will feed into this growth of wealth. In your mind, what are the major opportunities for someone looking at wealth management as an industry to be active in? And how do you see this landscape playing out in the different areas of ASEAN? Because if I remember correctly from this morning, it's a very diverse landscape, ASEAN.
Yes.
Okay, that was easy. We can go.
Good answer.
Very comprehensive.
I mean, if I have my wish list today, I mean, coming from an environment where I think there's a lot of growth, right? I see a couple of things. One of which is when you think about private wealth management in ASEAN today or in Asia Pac, you think about Hong Kong, you think about Singapore, but you don't really think about Malaysia. And Malaysia offers a lot of, potentially can offer a lot of products, can offer a landscape which can cater to, for example, the way I look at Malaysia today is, you know, or rather BNP looks at Malaysia today as a gateway to ASEAN and not Singapore, and that's quite interesting. I'm not selling BNP here, right? But I'm selling Malaysia and I'm selling the capabilities of Malaysia. And I think what, unfortunately, the finance ministry or our government has forgotten is that, you know, we are the center of ASEAN, we are the middle income of ASEAN, and there's a lot of wealth being created here. And therefore, so when you think about that from an ASEAN point of view, there is a lot of scope where, from a product point of view, from a clearing point of view, from a free flow of capital point of view, there's a lot of opportunities. What do I mean by that? So if you remember my context this morning, when you think about ASEAN AEC 2015, for example, you think about free flow of capital, labor, and services. When you think about services today, right, private banking, for example, wealth management today, what do we offer in Malaysia? You know, we are just basically talking about very plain vanilla products, right? And private clients today, or wealth management clients today, want more sophisticated products. They want hedging products, they want derivatives, they want, you know, alternative investment and so forth. So the product offering that we have in Malaysia today potentially can be diversified. That's my number one. Number two, I think when you talk about free flow of capital in terms of products, my wish list as well is that, you know, in a European context, we don't have Luxembourg. So when you think about a passporting sense, whereas, for example, if I were to launch a fund in Singapore or Malaysia and I want to sell it, cross-sell it, for example, to a private client in Thailand or Brunei or Indonesia, there is a lot of issues involved, legal issues and so forth, right? So that's something which you need to think about, right? Because there isn't a common clearinghouse in ASEAN today. And so that's where I think the challenge is, and I suppose there's the opportunity as well.
Especially for Labuan, if I dare say so. Yeah. Bernard, would you like to respond to the earlier question about the opportunities in ASEAN wealth management?
Yeah, I guess at the risk of being a frog in a well, in other words, we're all answering our questions from these questions from our own perspective.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So I'll take a slightly different view on that. I think while all that Patrick has said is valid, the question was what if one is thinking about entering this area today, what would one? I would encourage people to think about segments of clients, by which I mean the end clients. Where does one have a competency to deliver a set of solutions, whatever the solutions are, whatever the products are, whatever the outcomes are that Patrick's been talking about, to a particular segment. In other words, there are very few financial organizations going forward that can probably cater to everybody.
Yeah.
Increasing cross-border regulations, etc. Right? So it's going to be very difficult. The opportunity, therefore, becomes for entrepreneurial activities to focus on particular segments. So just to give you an example, you know, the number of in ASEAN, in Asia, the greatest wealth creation sits in business families. We're not talking about the big business families. We're talking about families that have fairly decent operations, fairly profitable, generating their whatever surplus profits to the family every year, whether it's hundreds of thousands or millions or hundreds of billions, doesn't matter. There's a whole pool of clients of that profile. They all have a set of needs that have to do with perhaps corporate finance, hedging, whatever you call it. And perhaps the way to look at it is from the client segment perspective, as opposed, in addition to just a product focus. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Millie? Sorry, it's getting really boring now, but we will start a discussion after this, I suspect.
When I talk about being a frog in the well, I would say I'm like a cat among all the time. Because I don't deal, of course, with the management products.
No.
I don't deal. But if you define wealth management to include looking after family in terms of the succession planning because of the wealth, I think it is very important, as Dr. Daud has said, that we are really at the front line. We really haven't gone into this space for a long time. We are all each looking over each other's shoulders to see what best can be done.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very proud when Labuan took on the initiative to amend the legal framework. Now that's in place. That is something that kind of look to stay competitive in the legal framework situation. But having said that, to me, it's crucial that the rest of the country in Malaysia itself, because we are tapping into and serving families in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia, but just look at our own backyard in Malaysia itself. It's crucial that the other departments understand this framework. Because, very simple example, if we do up a Labuan Trust or a Labuan Foundation, and the family happens to want to transfer land to be held, maybe it's an ancestral home which is worth millions, and they want that to continue to be held by the structure, our land office doesn't know what is a foundation. So you go to the land office say, well, if it is a incorporate body, certificate of incorporation, show me who's the list of shareholders. But there's no shareholders. So the left hand must be speaking to the right. There must be an ecosystem where they understand the framework. They also, at the same time, they work collaboratively and cooperatively. So that is something that, to me, is very important, that the rest of the stakeholders, so-called, understand that they are stakeholders in the country itself as it grows in these industries. And of course, similarly, the framework needs to continue to grow. I mean, we talk about, Bernard was talking about the wealth. A lot of our wealth is captured in family businesses. So family businesses are held in Sdn Bhd, which many of our families are enjoying the status of private SM company, right? So private SM company, you can only have individual shareholders. So the minute you put the private SM company to be owned by a corporation like foundation or a corporate trustee, you lose the private SM company. Now, is that what the legislator have intended? Is that something we can breach a gap and allow that to happen? Because that's the wealth they're looking at. They're looking, apart from financial assets, they're looking at their flagship, and they want this to be protected. So I hope that part, as the legislations are in place, they will continue to evolve and give attention to this kind of circumstances.
Absolutely, but I think this is something to do with the fact that, again, we've grown so quickly that we've not been able to catch our breath. So if you look at the, private wealth management growth in Europe, for example, they've had hundreds and hundreds of years to get to where they are today. Dr. Daud.
If I can start off looking at the Malaysian capabilities, and I keep saying that more and more in the last few hour, 1 hour or so. Let us take our MBA program in Malaysia from both private and public universities. There's no one dedicated program on wealth management. If there are, the component of wealth management is only, I mean, they call it lip service kind of, 30% of the component. So I think we have to engage the media, try to create the alarm in Malaysia. Wanted to be the center of wealth management. Who are the young people coming up to take this challenge as a career path? There's no dedicated wealth management as we have seen in Singapore and Hong Kong, not to mention the Switzerland and Luxembourg and whatnot. So this is number one. Number two, I mean, Labuan somehow is physically located in the center of
Asia.
Asia, very much. I mean, somehow, in terms of location, in terms of, you know, the accessibility is there, but Labuan has to perhaps believe in itself more and try to put a more forceful kind of flagship, because there's nothing to lose, because at the end of the day, because we are between Hong Kong and Singapore, we are between Myanmar and Philippines, we are in the center of all the connectivity. So perhaps Labuan can be, I think I like the idea that we have to create a more flagship kind of wealth management, both Islamic and conventional, more visible in our media, in our MITI and Metrate and what have you, so that we are known and we can attract the traffic to this part of the world. And but before we talk about wealth management, we have to talk about wealth creation, because if there's no wealth, there's no management.
Nothing to manage.
So wealth creation, of course, from Sharia perspective, should be Sharia compliant. But that's why I think we have to see how can we create more wealth in more sophisticated product. Only then we can manage the wealth more evidently. So wealth creation is not seen that much in Malaysia. I mean, again, talking about, you know, people are talking about angel investor, then seed investor, class A, B, and C, and IPO investor. In Malaysia, we don't see that kind of the talking even. There's no people. There's no one talking about angel investor. Who are the angel investor in this country? Who are the seed investor? Who are the class A, class B, class C investor before they go to IPO? In Hong Kong, in Indonesia, in Singapore, you can see that clearly mentioned. So this is one of the aspects that we have to articulate and debate and challenge the regulators, the stakeholders, to be more, I would say, more ahead of time and try to create the environment. Otherwise, we are talking about the same thing over and over for the next few years. So we have to create the infrastructure, the capabilities, the flagship, and the visibility for us to take this challenge.
Thank you, Datuk. I'd like to open now to the floor, if there are any questions. A mic will be with you shortly, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon. Talking about Labuan, who's going to go forward, and the infrastructure you have there with the kind of advice you're getting, I don't think we'll move forward until you start to approach Labuan as an Asian entity, listening to Asians rather than expatriates from London or Europe, and trying to put the structure there in their products, the fee structure or whatever, because I think if we emulate from Singapore of how it became a financial center, the approach will be far better, because our demographics, our culture is more. Asians are very private. They have a lot of money. But for them to come and invest, and if you want Labuan to move up, you need the culture that understands Asians. Right now, from what I've been attending a lot of these seminars, I see expatriates sitting up there giving ideas to Labuan Offshore from their perspective of Europe. Now, I mean, the last seminar I attended, someone talked about fee-based and all that. You can do that. If our country is developed, our culture, our education has gone to the level where we can understand, people understand. But Asia is completely different. You start imposing things like what you do in Europe, in Asia, you can forget the clients will just shy away. So I think if for Labuan to move up the way that you all have good visions, I think we should emulate an Asian country, which has already gone, maybe like Singapore or something else, but not Europe. And then you find that we will understand the Asians and approach them with products that are good for them and demographically, you know, more suited. I mean, that's my opinion. That's what I think we need.
Thank you. No, I mean, the cultural issue is a huge issue. I'd like Millie to share a few thoughts on that, because I think you deal with a lot of Asian families coming from a Canadian-based legal firm. So you understand almost the dichotomy that arises there.
Yes, this is certainly something that is actually on the table. I guess my blessing is that I practiced here for 27 years before moving. So the understanding of who we are and how the Asian values are being represented but not spoken about, how certain things are, there is not even an eye contact between the nephew managing director and the retiring chairman. Those things are very peculiar but very deep-rooted. And so when we are sitting with families in Asia, it's totally different dynamics from sitting with families in North America when we act with North American family. North American families are very outspoken, generation gap is almost zero. It's more who is sitting in what position to speak. But here we will have a situation where the patriarch, when he walks in, the patriarch may have absolutely no position in the board, but the managing director would certainly not be bringing up anything the patriarch is not following. But this is the culture. And if we miss this, and all we want to do is coming from outside to come here and say, these are the strategy, take it or leave it. It won't be. So definitely what you have brought up is completely true, because unlike corporate exercises where you can make cold calls to family and say, I have got this kind of strategy, I could do this kind of enterprise, would you like to? You can make cold calls and still get invited to the board to hear about it. Not when private wealth planning is concerned. Nobody can make cold call. If it is not because of connections or because somebody else, or bankers are very good connections, because a lot of trustees with bankers who have served them for years, you can't get in because you are talking about not just money. Actually, at the end of the day, we are talking about the family. And we are talking about an issue which is very emotional, the mortality of the founder. And he's trying to plan something that is supposed to survive after his death. He can choose the best board of directors to manage his enterprises according to their skill, but he cannot choose his sons and his daughters. They are already there. It's a fixed pool he has to work with. So the question is, how do you walk alongside them to help them? Like a very simple example, definition of family. North Americans, the definition of family always include in-laws. I have yet to act for a single family in Asia where definition of family include their in-laws. But I will always say, in-laws are your influences. They influence your children, they influence your grandchildren. If you don't include them, you exclude them at your own risk. So now what do we do? There's no right or wrong. This is the patriarch intention. So we find other ways. In the family charter, I would create different forum, of a family forum which in-laws are invited, because you want to hear them. You want them to take ownership too of what the patriarch has set behind. So therefore, instead of fighting against the culture and say, how can you not include in-law? We understand the culture and we walk alongside, and then we try to bridge the gap for the founder. So this is the difference, and you spot on. Because of the family, you know, in terms of wealth management, I was just sharing just now, I mean, when you do with corporations and do enterprises, you're making money, and inherently in there is already risky. People know that. But when it comes to money that's already made and how to transfer, it's a different skill set. We're talking about preservation. We're talking about protection. We're talking about, again, the founder who's going to be gone in a couple of years. in the next decades, in 2 or 3 decades' time. So the question then is a very vulnerable situation. They are caught on, and most of our founders are not skilled to do this. So I think service providers, if we already understand the culture, we are 10 steps ahead already. We kind of understand certain silences, we kind of understand the looks between different members of the board, because we understand certain things are in there but not spoken out. So, you know, I agree totally with you.
Thank you, Millie. Is there another question?
Patrick, this is, you've been sitting there very quietly, hoping no one will notice you. No, I'm a financial advisor here, and I agree with your approach and your thoughts on ASEAN as a tremendous area for opportunity, for growth, and for private and all types of investment, really. But having lived and worked in as well as in Malaysia, in Indonesia, it's not difficult to see certain problems below the surface, such as corporate governance issues and levels of high levels of corruption, which are currently affecting, I'm sure, things like foreign direct investment. So there are issues other than just economic, which anybody wishing to invest in ASEAN is going to have to deal with. So what are your thoughts as an investment manager in having to deal with those aspects?
Well, you're not incorrect by saying that there's definitely some corporate governance issues in companies within Malaysia and across the region. But embedded as a professional like myself in our process is that when I look at a franchise of a company, for example, what we look at more often than not is we actually weight a lot in terms of corporate governance. So 15% of our weight of a particular stock we evaluate is on corporate governance. Attached to that is another 15% on management quality, and another 15% of that is on earnings. So if you think about a franchise value of a company, it's incorporated in that is like, 45% of that is, or 30% of that is in corporate governance. And so we try to avoid historical issues of families, like you mentioned, where family, a lot of conglomerates across the region are family owned, and they have their own self-interest, apart from minority interests like ourselves, right? And so the challenge as investors like ourselves who are professional is that where do you draw the line between, for example, family-owned businesses who understand, entrepreneurship, but at the same time may not take care of minorities like myself, and that's obviously that's a challenge. And so when you engage with a lot of these corporates, one of the first questions I ask them is, how many independent directors do you have in your board? Very simple question, right? How many times have you changed your CFO? How many times have you placed out your shares in an open market at the top end of the market? These are very simple questions, but it tells you a lot about the company, right? And this gives us a flavor of how corporate governance is dealt with at the corporate level in ASEAN. And so when you start understanding all these families, for example, the company I mentioned earlier on, Lumpur Group, for example, Lumpur Group is renowned to have very corporate governance. Where do you draw the line? This is a fantastic company. It's middle income. It's growing fantastically every year. It's giving out dividends and so forth, right? And so you have to weigh, the judgment call is that you have to weigh versus corporate governance versus the long-term earnings potential of this company. At some point, it may come and bite you, but you don't, you have to assess it based on how we assess it, that, 30% of that is based on corporate governance. So if you think that 30% of that weight overshadows the 60 other percent of that potential of that company, then you don't invest in that company, right? More often than not, from my experience, a lot of small cap companies, family-owned businesses, have bad corporate governance, but they also have very fantastic business as well. So you have to make a proper judgment on that. And I think it's the same thing with how you access in a world where compliance is an issue for our group, for example. How do you accept a potential client to a company, for example? That's a corporate governance issue as well, right? And so, yeah, it's definitely challenging.
Yeah, interesting. So there are clearly filters that you can kick in to ensure that there is some kind of a check and balance. And talking about filters, I'd like to ask Datuk here whether the Islamic wealth management industry and the kind of products and the solutions, you know, and the Sharia filters that go into them. You know, when I personally look at Islamic wealth management, I am unsure whether it's an issue of demand, lack of, or whether it's an issue of product acceptable too. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, please.
I'm here to take on the easy question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Oh no.
Yes or no answer.
Yes, or is there a yes or no answer to this? Is there a yes or no?
not that easy though.
I agree.
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I have seen, I have spent most of my time, half of my time in Middle East and Europe, in the 11 months of the year, and only 1 month in Malaysia during Ramadan for the buka puasa. Right? And the culture of the Muslim community is also diversified. Okay, it's not only one culture. North Africa, Africa, Middle East, even GCC, Saudi and Kuwaiti are two different cultures altogether. I mean, the one who call the shot are the family, even for the government posts, not only for the economics activities. So we have to understand the very root of the wealth being managed in that particular sector. In Malaysia, we have seen some Malay families who are doing well, and they got problem in the third or second generation, started to fight one another, bringing the case to the court and this and that. So it could happen to any other family as well, but the problem now, there's no dedicated Sharia compliance scheme in Malaysia, which is not that visible. So we are in the early stage of the journey, and we have to work harder to make it happen. And how to make it happen is not only Labuan, but also all the other stakeholders. The demand is there, I would say. We have heard from some of the Middle East colleagues and friends, and also from the China Muslim. They are coming to Malaysia. They wanted to have houses in Kelantan, easy for them to go back, and they are looking for some other investment in Johor. We have seen many Central Asia Muslim. They are looking for Malaysia, from all the Tan, other than Kelantan, of course, from that part of the world. You're not taking my job, eh? Okay. 4 o'clock already.
Understands it, maybe.
Okay, because over there all the Tan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, other than Kelantan in Malaysia. Okay, so no, you're taking the job. Okay.
Got it the second time.
Yeah. So they are interested to consider a global platform of wealth management, but we're the champion now in the market. So Dubai is benefiting a lot by default, not by design, due to the crisis in the North Africa, Libya, and Egypt, and Syria, and Iraq. All the wealth, all the rich people of that community, and Dubai has been very flexible, nimble. They make it easy to get the visa, and the money flow to Dubai through the banks. The bank give back the money to the community, or the investor themselves buying to the properties. So we should be able to understand the conflict of Iran. Of course, Iran is a sanctioned country, but put aside Iran, but other countries which we can deal with them better. So this is something I'm going a bit further from your question just now, but we have to see the future, and how can we put the platform for those people to come to Malaysia. And ability to focus is half of the winning recipe, if you like. So this is not happening, and I wish I'm wrong, but in my analysis, this is basically the bottom line. The demand is there because the Dubai is benefiting a lot. The Dubai is a good case of benefiting from wealth management by default, not by design. What more if they were to design, which they are doing at the moment? They wanted to create Dubai as the capital of Islamic economy, not even finance, it's economy, tourism, second house, entertainment, Islamic entertainment, of course, finance, halal, So they are putting them to, in Malaysia we have so many segments. Halal does not talk to finance, it's said banking. It's said banking does not talk to what have you. Wakaf is another area altogether. So everything fragmented. In Dubai, everything under one ruler, one sheikh.
Yeah.
Whether we can do that, I don't know.
Might make it easier. I think we have time for one last question, maybe.
My name is John Song. I mean, the Labuan, you're trying to create this, using it as a base for wealth management, but you can't even cater for Malaysians to base their wealth management. How can you then try to go to ASEAN in the first place?
I support your question.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I think theoretically, Labuan it was originally formed to not serve Malaysians. And I think through the years, what has happened is that we've opened it up to Malaysians. And hence, we're doing a lot of work in Malaysia now, not just in Kuala Lumpur, but in Johor Bahru, in Penang, to talk about the benefits of Labuan. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to weigh in on that question, because it's quite Labuan-centric. No, I'm on my own here. So yes, okay, but I'll have you know that actually with a lot of, we don't require trusts to be registered, for example, but we know we have more than 200 trusts in Labuan. We have about 140 foundations in Labuan, and there are a lot of Malaysian assets in those wealth management structures. So it may not be well known, it may be the best secret in Kuala Lumpur, but Labuan does cater to Malaysians and Malaysian assets, and hence we're talking to you today. Thank you. Yeah, just a quick one, because I think, Bernard, you need to leave, no? Yeah. We might lose a panelist. Is it for Bernard?
No, it's fine.
Oh, okay.
I just want to say that I can't agree more than Millie. We actually went through the registration, and actually all the service provider in Malaysia doesn't quite know how to do it.
Yeah. It's an issue of ecosystems, issue of education. But you know, at the end of the day, we have to consider the fact that we have gotten here very, very quickly. So I'm not saying we cut ourselves too much slack, but we recognize that and move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I could just add, I mean, the fact does remain that in Asia, the estate planning side, which Labuan is hoping to step into the space, is new. So we can't expect the services to grow immediately to that stage. But what is being done in events like this, where we share, because high net worth family need to be served interdisciplinary. No single discipline can serve the needs of one high net. But sitting side by side with each other, we learn from each other, and we are able then to provide more value-added service to the client. I think this kind of events will be one step towards that direction. And hopefully the authority will continue to lend great ears to the grievances and to the nuances that are in our family, so that although they imported a certain legal framework, they will tweak it to make it relevant to our Asian culture, you know. So
thank you, Millie. Thank you.
Need the patience, yeah.
Thank you. And that's it, folks. We don't have a lot more time. Thank you very much on behalf of Labuan IBFC Inc. Thank you very much for spending your day with us.